I'm Tim Bradner. Welcome to Capitol Views. And we welcome to Senator Berta Gardner, the Senate Minority Leader from Anchorage. And thank you for joining us, Senator.
Thank you, Tim. I'm really happy to be here and appreciate that you guys do this show.
Well, you're welcome. Senator, we are hearing a lot about the state's economy and, of course, the state fiscal situation, something that's been with us for a couple of years now. Your thoughts? I mean, what are you hearing from constituents? What are you hearing in the legislature?
I think that there's a growing awareness. In fact, I would say that anybody who's paying attention knows that we have a real problem, and my constituents want a solution. I think that all Alaskans do. You're aware that we had a bunch of presentations recently, and I think that there's just broad agreement that the state is in a recession. And it could have been avoided had the legislature acted promptly in putting up in place a fiscal plan. I hope, and I'm guardedly optimistic, that it can happen this year. $3 billion shortfall in our budget after having cut $3 billion. We're spending $3 billion less than we did at the peak in 2013 when we spent about $7.6 billion. So we've had dramatic cuts, and people should know that. I'm a little alarmed by those who say that we can just cut our way out of this, or that should be our focus. I think that risks serious damage, and I believe we had confirmation of that from economists that say we can make the reception be worse. We can worsen it, or we can turn it around, and we really have to act now.
Depending on how you do it.
Depending on what we do now and what we fail to do. So it's critically important that we take care of things today. What they're telling us is that when we don't have a fiscal plan, when we have continuing shortages, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is the enemy of investment. And people who are considering investments look at Alaska and they say, well, you know, their finances are just a mess. We'll either wait or we'll go somewhere else. And it's hard to turn that ship around. We have the opportunity still to do it, but the longer we wait, the harder it is and the more losses there are. It's beginning to spread. There's a contagion. You know, oil field workers are laid off, and then the oil supply company people lose their jobs, and then the people that sell groceries and fuel and housing to those people start to lose their jobs, and it gets worse and worse. That's kind of the definition of a recession, and there's no doubt it's happening.
Yeah, and I think we're beginning to see that trickle out even to the retail sector. You know, last year it seemed to be confined to the oil sector and the construction.
Right.
And now it's beginning to sort of radiate out through the economy.
And that's what makes it a recession and not just a downturn.
Yeah. I think interesting some of the perspectives of different economists and business leaders that have been in Juneau, like Joe Beadle of Northern Bank.
Yes.
Makes the point that uncertainty is a major challenge.
Yes.
People want to know what is going to be done, what can be done.
They need to have confidence that something has been done and that we have a sustainable plan and a durable plan that we don't have to revisit every year with changing prices, and something that's sort of equitable across the state, because if it's not, then we're coming back again.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about one of the most important ideas that are out there is the use of permanent fund earnings? Do you have any thoughts about that, and maybe how the dividend
Absolutely.
factors into that?
Well, first of all, I think it's increasingly understood, in part due to the work of the University of Alaska and the Institute of Social Economic Research, and they have done a study that talks about how the dividend keeps a lot of people out of poverty. If the dividend program were lost and we didn't do that, 15 to 20,000 more Alaskans would be in poverty. So, and those are costs to everybody. Additionally, what the dividend does is create business. I mean, especially for small businesses, it's an economic boost all across this state that people have that. And Alaska is one of the most financially equitable states in the nation in terms of the distribution of wealth, and it's partly because of the dividend. So although there's no doubt that the earnings reserve has to be part of filling this huge gap that we have, the dividend, it's not without costs for the dividend, and we, I think, need to make sure that we continue a strong dividend program, and that when we have to go there, it should be the last thing we do. That's our conviction.
Yeah, the thought occurred to me that the reduction of the dividend last year may have been a factor in the less consumer spending and maybe had an effect on retail employment. I mean, just that by
I
itself.
haven't actually asked that question directly of economists, but by implication, if the dividend results in a financial boon across the state to people who are selling things, and you cut it in half, well, then it does.
Yeah, I mean, intuitively, you think that. But also the other, this doesn't solve the entire problem, though. We still have a gap. I think in the governor's budget, he's still left with something like an $800 million
Right.
gap.
Not only does it not solve the problem, but it is the only option that adversely impacts every single Alaskan and only every single Alaskan. So that's why we say everything else has to happen first.
The dividend.
The dividend.
Yeah.
Changes to the dividend.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Do you think if any changes should be made, one of the criticisms of the governor's plan last year is that it disconnected the dividend from the performance of the fund, or it seemed to. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the governor thought that if the dividend was based on revenue to the state rather than on the earnings of the fund, that people would pay attention more. And I don't think that's true. People pay attention to how much the dividend is worth. That's what they pay attention to. And if you cut it, it doesn't matter if you cut it because the fund is earning less or because the state is earning less.
So you don't buy the argument that it causes a protective mechanism for the fund?
Not only do I disagree with the governor on that point, but I think that it's also a soft landing to end the dividend program because inevitably, over the long term, there will be less revenue from that source, and it would reduce the dividend.
Yeah. Well, Senator Gardner, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been interesting. And this is Tim Bradner. Thank you for joining us with Capitol Views.